Whether you are single, engaged, married, or still trying to understand where life is taking you, this is one story you should not scroll past. Her name was Tolu. At 24, Tolu was still young enough for people to call her small girl, yet old enough to carry dreams that felt bigger than the room she was in. She held onto her goals the way some people hold onto promises from God, carefully, quietly, and with deep conviction. They were never far from her mind. Even on ordinary days, they sat within her like a fire that refused to go out. She had just completed her service here in Abuja and had returned to live with her family in Ibadan. The white shirts and crested vest from her service days were folded neatly inside her box, not as old clothes, but as proof that one chapter had ended and another was supposed to begin. Every morning, Tolu woke with plans in her chest. She talked often about going back to school to study organizational psychology, then pushing further until she reached the highest level she could. Not because she wanted people to clap for her. Not because she wanted to impress relatives during Christmas visits. She simply loved the idea of becoming a woman who could think clearly, help people grow, and stand strong without depending on anyone to rescue her. Sometimes she would say it with a laugh, almost casually. "I'm not stopping at 1 degree," she would tell her friends. "I want to go far." Some people smiled and encouraged her. Some shook their heads as though she was being too ambitious. Others looked at her with surprise and said, "You really mean this thing?" She did. She meant every word. But life has a way of testing the things we mean most. Not long after Tolu returned from Abuja, attention began to gather around her almost immediately. Calls came from unfamiliar numbers. Women in church began to ask her mother strange, smiling questions. Neighbors who had barely greeted her before suddenly became warm. Family friends remembered they had sons, nephews, cousins, and very responsible young men who might be suitable. It was as if the whole city had come to a quiet agreement that now was the time. Her mother noticed before anyone else. She noticed the extra care people used when speaking to Tolu. She noticed how men looked up when she passed. She noticed the subtle comments, the coded questions, the way people measured a young woman once they felt she had reached marriageable age. Tolu's mother was not a wicked woman. She was not trying to destroy her daughter's future. She was simply a woman shaped by her own generation, by hardship, by warnings, by stories of women who waited too long and were later left with regret. To her, marriage was not just romance. It was security, timing, favor, and sometimes survival. She had a saying she liked to repeat. "Time waits for no woman." She would say it while washing plates. She would say it while folding wrappers. She would say it in that calm voice mothers use when they are trying to sound gentle but are really speaking from fear. One evening, Tolu sat on a short stool beside the kitchen door, slicing ugu leaves into a bowl. Her mother stood nearby, drying her hands on the edge of her wrapper. The silence between them felt deliberate. Finally, her mother spoke. "You are not a child anymore," she said. "Good people are asking about you. These things don't stay open forever." Tolu kept slicing for a moment before answering. "Mummy, I hear you, but I still want to continue my education." Her mother sighed, not angrily, but deeply. "School can still happen, but when a good door opens, you don't stand there thinking too long." Tolu forced a small smile, but inside she felt the familiar tension rise again. She loved her mother. She respected her. She knew the woman had prayed, wiped, and sacrificed too much to be dismissed lightly. When a mother speaks from worry, it doesn't bounce off the heart. It enters it. Her father, however, saw things differently. He was not loud. He did not argue often. He was the type of man who listened first and spoke after thinking things through. But when he did speak, his words stayed with you. One night, as they sat outside under the weak yellow bulb hanging from the veranda, he said quietly, "Marriage is a good thing, but it should not be the only thing. Let your mind and your hands have value first. Life is unpredictable." Tolu looked at him and felt relief spread through her chest. That was exactly what she had been trying to explain. He continued, "The right person will not be threatened by your becoming." That sentence stayed with her. For a while, it gave her strength. But one voice, even a wise one, often struggles against the noise of many others. Friends had opinions. Aunts had opinions. Church women had opinions. Older cousins who were unhappy in their own marriages still had opinions. Everyone seemed to agree on one thing. If a good man appeared, Tolu should not waste time. Then he came. His name was Samuel. He was a civil engineer based in Port Harcourt, tall, well-spoken, and composed in a way that made older people trust him quickly. He had the kind of job families like to mention with pride. He dressed simply but neatly. He spoke with confidence but not arrogance. He knew how to make eye contact when he spoke, and he always seemed to know the right thing to say. He told Tolu he admired intelligent women. He said he wanted a wife who could think for herself. He promised he would support her dreams. He spoke of partnership, shared purpose, a peaceful home, and a future built together. Her mother liked him almost immediately. Her father asked measured questions about his beliefs, his plans, and his expectations of marriage. Samuel answered well. Very well. Everything looked right. Everything sounded right. But somewhere inside Tolu, a small voice kept whispering, not yet. She tried to ignore it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was just uncertainty. Maybe she was overthinking, as people often accused her of doing. The pressure around her increased. Slowly at first, then all at once. You can study after marriage. If he is supportive, what is the problem? Do you want to miss a good man because of books? Women do both all the time. Those words were repeated so often that they started to wear down her confidence. She began to question herself. Was she being too rigid? Too idealistic? Too stubborn? Was she making a mountain out of something simple? One afternoon, after another emotional conversation with her mother, after another round of advice from relatives, after another wave of subtle guilt, Tolu finally said yes. Not with excitement, not with the joy people expected. Just quietly, just tidily, just enough to make everyone stop persuading her. Wedding preparations moved quickly, faster than her heart could settle. Clothes were bought. Dates were fixed. Calls were made. Lists were written. People congratulated her as though she had crossed into victory. One of her old friends hugged her tightly and whispered, "You are blessed. An engineer. God has answered." Tolu smiled because that was what the moment required. But deep inside, it felt as though she was standing still while her own life moved away without her. Marriage began beautifully, at least from the outside. New house, new routine, new identity. At first, Samuel was attentive. He checked on her. He brought things home. He spoke kindly. He made her feel chosen. For a while, she convinced herself that maybe everyone had been right. Maybe this was simply how adulthood looked. Maybe dreams did not disappear. Maybe they only needed time. Then real life settled in. Responsibilities multiplied quietly. Bills, meals, laundry, family expectations, visits, pregnancy, then another pregnancy, then another set of demands she had not seen coming. The plan to return to school was pushed forward a little, then a little more, then again. Each time, it sounded reasonable. Let's stabilize first. Maybe after the baby. This is not the best season. Why rush? Those words became the background music of her life. Months turned into years. The notebook she had once filled with plans remained untouched. Application ideas stayed in her phone notes. Research dreams became things she remembered in small, painful flashes while cooking, bathing children, or trying to stay awake after midnight. She loved her children. Fiercely. That was never the problem. The problem was that somewhere inside all that love, she was fading. Samuel also began to change, though not all at once. He started coming home later than before. The warmth in his voice became inconsistent. The man who once praised her ideas now seemed irritated whenever she spoke about her future. One evening, while clearing the table after dinner, she mentioned school again. This time he did not smile. He leaned back and said, "This is not the right time for that. We have other priorities." Tolu stood still for a moment. She nodded because arguing felt exhausting. But inside, something weakened. Marriage had not become painful overnight. It had happened slowly, like a room growing darker one shade at a time until you suddenly realize you can no longer see clearly. From the outside, everything still looked fine. People admired her family. Church members complimented her peaceful home. Women told her she was lucky. But behind the compliments was a tired woman who no longer recognized her own reflection. The pregnancies had come too close together. Her body was always recovering from something. Her sleep was broken. Her confidence was thinning out. There were days she looked in the mirror and felt disconnected from the woman staring back at her. One night, after putting the children to bed, she sat beside Samuel and tried once more. "I don't want to lose myself," she said softly. He barely looked up from his phone. "Is taking care of your family now called losing yourself?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. How do you explain an invisible pain to someone who has no interest in seeing it? Over time, Little comments became heavier. You don't contribute financially. Other women are doing much more. You have too much time to think. Every sentence reduced her a little more. She called her mother one afternoon and tried to speak honestly, but the response came quickly. Marriage is not easy. Be patient. Don't create a problem where there is none. Her father noticed the sadness before anyone else did. One day during a visit, he asked her quietly, "Are you truly all right?" She smiled too quickly. "I'm fine." It was the kind of lie people tell when they are too tired to be understood. Years passed. Tolu turned 30 almost without noticing. Then one Saturday afternoon, while shopping at a supermarket in Bodija, she heard someone call her name. Tolu. She turned and froze. It was Miriam, her university friend. The same bright face, but fuller now. More settled. More sure of itself. There was a steadiness in Miriam that immediately unsettled Tolu. Not because it was offensive, but because it reminded her of the version of herself she had misplaced. They hugged warmly between the shelves. They laughed. They asked the usual questions. How have you been? How many kids now? Where are you working? That last question landed strangely. Tolu answered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, after putting the children to bed and sitting alone in the half-dark, she sent Miriam a message. That message opened a door. They began talking often. Miriam shared her own struggles, how life had not been easy, how she had changed jobs twice, how she had once doubted herself, how she had slowly rebuilt confidence through learning and persistence. Tolu began to talk too. Really talk. About postponing herself. About losing her voice. About how marriage had become a place where everyone was fed except her soul. One night, after listening quietly, Miriam said something that sat heavily between them. You entered marriage before you had finished meeting yourself. Tolu stared at the message for a long time. It hurt because it was true. From that point, she began to wake up. Not dramatically. Not in one perfect moment. Just little by little. She noticed how often she apologized for existing. She noticed how quickly she dismissed her own needs. She noticed how she asked permission for things that should have belonged to her by right. Then one evening, during an argument over money and responsibilities, Samuel said with irritation, "You add no real value here." The room went quiet. Something in Tolu did not break. It became clear. That night, after everyone slept, she opened her laptop and enrolled in an online certification course. It was a small step, but it was hers. She began studying after midnight. She read articles with one eye half closed from exhaustion. It was not glamorous. It was not easy, but it felt like oxygen. Samuel noticed the change and did not like it. "You've become different," he said one evening. Tolu looked at him and answered calmly, "I am becoming awake." The tension in the house increased. There were more arguments, longer silences, more attempts to make her feel selfish for wanting more than survival. But now she had tasted something she could not unlearn, herself. Months later, she attended Miriam's book launch in Lagos. As she sat in the audience and watched her old friend speak with confidence and purpose, tears filled her eyes. Not because she envied her, but because grief has a way of appearing when you finally see how much of yourself you abandoned to keep everyone else comfortable. That night, after returning home, another argument started. Samuel, annoyed by her growing independence, said sharply, "If career mattered this much to you, maybe you should never have gotten married." Tolu did not reply immediately. She simply looked at him with a calmness that surprised even her. The next morning, she packed a few things for herself and the children and went to her parents' house. Not to end everything overnight. Not to make a public scene. Just to breathe. Just to hear her own thoughts again. Her father opened the door, looked at her properly, and said softly, "You look tired." Then after a pause, he added, "But you also look like you are returning to yourself." She nearly cried. Because sometimes healing begins with being seen accurately. After some time, she returned home. But she did not return as the same woman who had left. This time, she came back with boundaries. She came back with clarity. She continued learning. She took small remote jobs, then freelance consulting, then project support work for small organizations. The money was not much in the beginning, but the effect on her spirit was enormous. She stood straighter. She spoke with more certainty. She no longer asked for permission to grow. The marriage did not turn into a fairy tale. Not every issue disappeared. Not every wound closed at once. Some days were still hard. Some conversations remained difficult. Some regrets still visited her in quiet moments. But she was no longer disappearing. Years later, Toulouse stood in front of a room filled with young women at a leadership event in Ilorin. She was not there as somebody's wife, not there as a woman people pitied, not there as a dream deferred. She stood there as herself. When it was time to speak, she shared her story carefully. She did not insult marriage. She listened to lectures with earpieces while folding clothes. She wrote notes in between chores. She did not turn her pain into bitterness. She simply told the truth. Marriage is not the enemy, she said. But if you enter it before you have built a strong sense of who you are, you may spend years trying to recover pieces of yourself that should never have been surrendered. The room was silent. Some women looked down. Some nodded. Some blinked back tears. That night, before sleeping, Toulouse opened her Bible and read a verse she had encountered many times before, but now it touched her differently. Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life. This time, she understood it, not as a slogan, not as a pretty line, but as survival. Toulouse did not become perfect. Her life did not become spotless. She did not wake up one morning and suddenly erase every missed year. But she became whole in a way she had not been before. And sometimes, wholeness is a greater miracle than perfection. So if somewhere in this story you see yourself, hear this clearly. It is not wrong to pause. It is not rebellion to grow at your own pace. It is not selfish to want a life that still includes you. Dreams may wait. They may bend. They may be delayed by love, pressure, motherhood, fear, or timing. But they do not have to be buried.